We're your hosts, Logan, Cian,
and Wynn.
And today we're covering the story of 3-year-old Caylee Anthony.
In the summer of 2008, a missing child case caught the attention of the entire United States, creating one of the most controversial cases to ever hit the mainstream media.
Caylee Anthony was a 3-year-old little girl living in Orlando, Florida with her 22-year-old mother, Caylee Anthony. Caylee was also close with her maternal grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony. However, we do feel it's important to focus not only on the case of Caylee, but also who Caylee Anthony was as a person. To understand Caylee Anthony, we have to go back to when she was a kid and where she came from. Caylee Anthony was born in 1986, and she was raised in Orlando, Florida, where her parents were George and Cindy Anthony. From the outside, the Anthony household looked just like any other middle-class family. But behind closed doors, things were far from normal. George was a former police officer who turned into a security guard, so he already had some experience with the law. And Cindy was a nurse, and she was described by many by deeply, deeply protective. Caylee was very, over-controlled by her parents and very disciplined, and because of that, she was known to be a pathological liar. She told classmates that she was graduating. She told her family that she was graduating when she actually wasn't. And she told her family and her friends that she had jobs such as a job at Universal Studios, even though she had been fired months earlier. But it's clear that by the time that Caylee was born, Caylee's relationship with her own parents was really fractured. Okay, now let's talk about the case itself. Caylee Anthony was last seen on June 16th of 2008. However, her mother, Caylee, did not report her missing until 31 days later on July 15th of 2008. She was reported missing by Caylee's mother, Cindy Anthony, who called 911 after confronting her daughter about the disappearance.
911, what's your emergency? There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
In those 31 days, Caylee partied at clubs. She got tattoos, including one that read Bella Vita, which means good life in Italian, and told friends that Caylee was with her nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. On July 21st through the 22nd, 5 days after the alleged death of Caylee Anthony, Caylee claimed she was in Tampa Bay for a work trip, and that's the reason family and friends had not seen her or Caylee in a while. However, investigators would come to find that this was another flat-out lie.
There were search parties and police involvement the moment Caylee was reported missing on July 15, 2008. Detectives were immediately suspicious of Caylee Anthony's behavior. During the early police interviews, Caylee lied repeatedly, claiming she worked at Universal Studios, even leading investigators through the building before admitting she had been fired years earlier. She insisted that a babysitter named Zanny had kidnapped Caylee, but no such person existed. Investigators searched the Anthony's home and found items that would later become key pieces of evidence. Photos of Caylee partying during the time Caylee was missing, computer searches for terms like chloroform and neck breaking, and a strong odor coming from the trunk of Caylee's Pontiac Sunfire. Forensic tests on the trunk found that traces of chloroform, human decomposition, and hair consistent with Caylee's, though none of it was conclusive enough to prove the death. And then, as if that wasn't enough, cadaver dogs brought to the Anthony's residence and Caylee's Pontiac Sunfire alerted to the scent of human decomposition, first in the backyard and more alarmingly in the trunk of the car. Handler reports and training records confirmed that the dogs were certified in detecting human remains and had a reliable track record. The trunk contained a stained piece of carpet, a trash bag, and a strong odor, described by one officer as unmistakably that of a decomposing body. A forensic expert even found high levels of chloroform in the trunk and hair samples consistent with Caylee's, showing signs of post-mortem banding, something that only occurs after death.
However, one of the most critical aspects of the Caylee Anthony trial was that all of the evidence was circumstantial, meaning that there was no direct proof tying Caylee to the murder of her daughter. There were no eyewitnesses, no confession, no surveillance footage, and no definitive cause of death. Instead, the prosecution built the case on inferences like the smell in the car's trunk, the computer search for chloroform, the lies Caylee told, her partying after Caylee's disappearance, and the duct tape found with the remains. Caylee's trial began on May 24th of 2011 and would last nearly 6 weeks. Prosecution argued that Caylee intentionally killed her daughter using chloroform and duct tape and stuffing her in the back of her trunk before dumping her in a wooded area. They described her as a selfish young woman who just wanted to be free of the burden of motherhood, and the death of Caylee would allow her to go back to her carefree young adult life. And they pointed to the photos of Caylee partying and entering herself in hot body contests just days after Caylee's disappearance. And they leaned heavily on the forensic evidence found in the back of the trunk and the search history of chloroform on her computer and the duct tape found in the remains of Caylee. The defense, led by attorney Jose Baez, shocked the courtroom with an explosive opening that stated that Caylee had died in a tragic accident in the family's above-ground pool, and the father, Casey's father, George Anthony, was actually helping cover up the death of Caylee. And the bizarre antics and behavior of Caylee came from the fact that she was sexually abused by her father throughout her entire life. George denied all of these allegations once he was standing on trial, and the defense didn't really attempt to explain every piece of forensic evidence, but rather discredit the prosecution's narrative. And they pointed to the fact that the science behind the odor of a decomposing body, is unreliable, and that the state itself had overreached. Now, for questions that we would have asked the defense or Caylee herself, we have, why did you continue to lie? And that would just try and get into the minds of her head. What was the meaning behind the tattoo you got after Caylee's disappearance? Why did you stay in your family home if your father was allegedly very abusive? Why did you create false leads for police to follow, such as the occupation of working at Universal Studios? And then one for the investigators on the case. How do you mess up that bad? How do you mess up that bad?
Now, into one of the most discussed topics of this case, the forensic evidence. The Caylee Anthony trial also exposed a critical truth about forensic science. It's not always reliable. Some of the most compelling evidence in the case, like the alleged smell of death in Caylee's car, was based on subjective interpretation. One expert testified that the odor was consistent with human decomposition, but the science behind that claim was new, unvalidated, and not peer-reviewed, leading the defense to call it junk science. Similarly, a strand of hair found in the trunk was said to show post-mortem banding, a trait supposedly unique to dead bodies. But later, it was revealed that this kind of analysis had limited scientific backing and was far from conclusive. Then came the infamous computer searches. Prosecutors initially claimed Caylee searched for chloroform 84 times, but it was later discovered that this number was based on a misreading of the software, and the actual number was just 1.
These errors didn't just weaken the state's case, they damaged the credibility of forensic testimony altogether. The trial became a wake-up call about the limitations of forensic science when not properly vetted or when presented as more certain than it truly is. In the courtroom, forensic evidence can sound authoritative, but in reality, much of it rests on interpretation, evolving methods, and human error. In Caylee Anthony's trial, the doubt became a decisive factor. The jury didn't trust the science enough to convict, and the case became a cautionary tale of how bad or overstated forensics can lose a case, rather than prove one.
To begin to wrap this up, let's take some time to look at just how much the media affected this case and how Caylee's reintroduction to society has rocked the digital world. The United States went into a frenzy when this case hit the media as the investigation progressed, and it wasn't just a criminal case, it was a cultural moment. The disappearance of Caylee Anthony became a front-page news across the entire country. Major Works Network ran nightly coverage, and TV personalities like Nancy Grace fanned the flames, branding Caylee as a sociopath and labeling her the most hated mom in America. Online forums exploded with theories, sleuthing, and outrage. Protesters camped outside the Anthony family home for weeks, shouting and bearing photos. Megaphones holding signs that called Caylee a murderer. Strangers left teddy bears, photos, and handwritten notes and makeshift memorials for Caylee. For many, it was more than just a case, it was a morality play, with a beautiful child as an innocent victim and a villainous mother. Now, let's take a look at Caylee's reintroduction to society with this TikTok.
The point of this is for me to begin to reintroduce myself. I'm doing this both personally for me, but in a professional capacity. Moving forward, the majority of what you will see will be me speaking in a professional capacity. my goal is to continue to help give a voice to people, to give people tools and resources that they can utilize so they actually know where they can turn to.